My parents handed my sister a luxury cruise package like she had won a crown, then pressed a wrinkled $2 lottery ticket into my palm like they were tipping a waitress. 30 relatives laughed on cue. But nobody expected that ticket to expose why they spent my whole life making me feel small. Tell me where you are watching from, because soon you will understand exactly why I waited until they were trapped in the middle of the ocean to speak. My name is Kennedy Long. I am 33 years old. And if there is one thing I have mastered in 3 decades of life, it is the art of becoming furniture. I am the beige wall in the hallway. I am the coaster under the drink. I am the person you hand your coat to when you walk in the door. Forgetting that I am actually your niece or your cousin or your daughter, I have learned that silence is safe. I have learned that observation is a weapon, provided you never let anyone know you are holding it. Thanksgiving at my parents' house has never been about gratitude. It is a production. It is a stage play directed by my mother and financed by my father, performed for an audience of 30 relatives who are all terrified of being written out of the will. The air in the dining room always smells of roasted turkey, expensive perfume, and desperate ambition. This year, the performance was particularly elaborate. We had finished the main course, the plates, which I had helped clear while my sister Mallory sat checking her reflection in her phone screen, were stacked in the kitchen. The mood in the room was high. Wine had been flowing since 4 in the afternoon. My Uncle Jerry was already loud. His face flushed a deep red, telling a story about his golf swing that everyone had heard 5 times. My mother tapped her crystal glass with a silver spoon. The sharp, high-pitched ding cut through the chatter. Silence fell over the room. It was time. In most families, gifts are exchanged at Christmas. In the Long family, my parents prefer to stage their benevolence whenever they have the maximum number of spectators. They claimed it was because we were all together. But I knew the truth. They needed witnesses. Generosity does not count if nobody sees it. My father stood up. He is a tall man who wears suits on weekends. He cleared his throat, commanding the room with the practiced ease of a man who signs paychecks for a living. He placed a hand on my sister's shoulder. Mallory beamed. She is 2 years younger than me, but she has always been the protagonist of this family. She has the blonde hair that catches the light and the laugh that sounds like wind chimes. I have the dark hair that refuses to curl and a face that people describe as sensible. Dad smiled at the room. He said that he and Mom wanted to do something special for their girls this year. He talked about how hard Mallory had been working. Mallory works part-time at a boutique 3 days a week, mostly posting photos of her outfits on social media. But to hear my father tell it, she was running a Fortune 500 company. He handed her a thick, heavy envelope. It was cream-colored linen paper, embossed with gold. Mallory opened it with theatrical slowness. She pulled out a glossy brochure and a set of tickets. She gasped. She covered her mouth with her hands. She actually squeezed out a tear. It was a cruise, but it was not just a cruise. It was the Diamond-class Caribbean Escape. My father announced the details to the room because subtlety is a foreign language to him. It was a 10-day voyage. It included a private suite with a balcony. It included unlimited shore excursions. It included the premium drink package and a spa credit. My mother chimed in, her voice dripping with honey. She mentioned the price tag. She did not say it directly, but she alluded to it heavily, making sure everyone knew the value. It was a package worth $12,900. She called it a family upgrade. She said Mallory needed to recharge. The room erupted. Aunts cooed. Cousins leaned in to see the brochure. Mallory jumped up and hugged our parents, jumping up and down like a teenager. She held the tickets up like a trophy. She looked at her husband, Grant, who was grinning like a shark who had just smelled blood in the water. Then, the room went quiet again, because there were 2 daughters. My father turned to me, the warmth in his eyes cooled by several degrees. It was a subtle shift, invisible to strangers, but glaring to me. It was the look you give a stray dog that you are trying to shoo away from your porch. He reached into his jacket pocket. There was no cream-colored linen envelope for me. There was no gold embossing. He pulled out a single, slightly crumpled piece of paper. It was orange and white. It was a scratch-off lottery ticket. He held it out to me. He said he thought this fit my situation perfectly. The silence in the room stretched thin, like a rubber band about to snap. I reached out and took the ticket. My hand did not shake. I refused to let it shake. It felt light and cheap against my skin. It was the kind of ticket you buy at a gas station when you are buying gum. It was a $2 ticket. My father smiled, a wide, magnanimous grin that did not reach his eyes. He told the room that since I was always talking about looking for new opportunities, he figured he would give me a head start. He said maybe I would get lucky for once. The laughter started as a ripple. My cousin Brian chuckled. Then Aunt Linda let out a short, sharp giggle. And then, because my parents were laughing, everyone else decided it was safe to laugh too. It became a wave. 30 people laughing at the discrepancy. $12,900 versus $2. The golden child versus the disappointment. I stood there, freezing cold in a room heated to 72 degrees. I looked at the ticket. Holiday cash. Grand prize $100 million. The odds were astronomical. It was a piece of trash paper. It was not a gift. It was a prop for a joke. And I was the punchline. My Uncle Jerry, emboldened by the wine and the crowd, leaned back in his chair. He called out across the table. He said I better be careful not to spend it all in one place. He asked if I needed financial advice on how to manage my portfolio of $2. The laughter spiked again. It hit me in the chest like a physical blow. It was a slap. It was a reminder of my place in the hierarchy. Mallory gets the world. Kennedy gets the scraps. Mallory gets the investment. Kennedy gets the gamble. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the ticket into confetti and throw it in my father's face. I wanted to flip the table, send the crystal glasses shattering against the wall, and scream about the years of neglect, the constant minimizing, the way they looked right through me unless they needed someone to clean up a mess. But I did not. I have spent 33 years surviving this family. You do not survive by fighting back. You survive by becoming soft. You absorb the blow. You let it sink in and disappear. If you react, they win. If you cry, they call you sensitive. If you get angry, they call you ungrateful. They would say it was just a joke. They would ask why I had no sense of humor. So I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I forced the corners of my mouth upward. It was a tight, painful smile. But it was a smile. I told them thank you. I said it was very thoughtful. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. My mother patted my cheek. She told me I was such a good sport. She turned back to Mallory, and the spotlight moved away from me. The show was over. The jester had been humiliated, and now the court could go back to adoring the princess. I sat back down. I placed the ticket next to my water glass. I focused on the tablecloth. It was white damask. There was a small stain near my fork where a drop of gravy had fallen. I stared at that stain. I focused on it until the edges of my vision blurred, but I felt eyes on me. At the head of the table, my grandmother was watching. Evelyn Hartwell. She is 82 years old. She sat in her wheelchair like it was a throne. She was the only person in the room who was not laughing. She was not even smiling. Her face was a mask of granite. Grandma Evelyn does not speak much these days. The family talks over her. They treat her like a relic, something to be dusted off for holidays and ignored the rest of the year. They talk about her hearing loss and her confusion. But I have always suspected she hears more than she lets on. She was looking directly at me. Her eyes are a pale, watery blue, but in that moment, they looked sharp enough to cut glass. She looked from me to the crumpled ticket on the table, and then back to my face. There was no pity in her expression. I hate pity. Pity is soft. Pity is useless. What I saw in her face was something else. It was recognition. It was anger. The dinner moved to dessert. My mother brought out the pumpkin pies. Mallory was still talking about the cruise, reading details from the brochure aloud. She was debating which swimsuit to buy. Grant was making jokes about the all-you-can-eat buffets. I stood up to help serve the pie because that is what I do. I serve. I moved around the table, placing slices of pie in front of people who barely acknowledged my presence. When I reached Grandma Evelyn, she did not look at the pie. She reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Her fingers were cold, the skin paper thin, but the bones underneath were steel. She pulled me down slightly. The room was loud, filled with the noise of 30 people talking over each other, creating a chaotic wall of sound. She leaned in. I smelled peppermint and old lavender. She did not let go of my wrist. She squeezed it, hard, once, twice, a signal. She mouthed 3 words. She did not say them out loud, but her enunciation was precise. I saw her lips move clearly. Call Miles Kitteridge. I froze. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I could not place it. It sounded like a name from a different lifetime. Miles Kitteridge. I looked at her, confused. I tried to ask her what she meant, but she released my wrist and turned her head away. She picked up her fork and took a bite of pie as if nothing had happened. She retreated back into her silence, back into the role of the frail old woman in the corner. But I saw her hand. It was resting on her purse. It was a large, black leather purse that she kept on her lap at all times. She was clutching it tight. My mother called my name from the kitchen, asking where the whipped cream was. I snapped back to reality. I finished serving the pie. I sat back down, but the noise of the room felt distant now. The laughter sounded tinny and hollow. Call Miles Kitteridge. The words echoed in my head. I looked at the ticket again. $2? A joke. I needed to get out. The air in the room was suddenly too thick to breathe. The smell of turkey grease and sweet potato casserole was making me nauseous. I stood up and mumbled something about needing the restroom. Nobody looked up. Nobody cared. I walked out of the dining room, down the hallway, past the family photos that lined the walls. There were dozens of photos of Mallory prom queen, graduation, wedding, engagement. There were 2 photos of me. One was a group shot where my eyes were closed. I went into the powder room and locked the door behind me. I leaned back against the wood. Exhaling a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 hours. The bathroom was quiet. It was the only place in the house where I could be alone. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked plain. I looked like a woman who had just been told by her own parents that she was worth exactly $2. I looked down at my hand. I was still clutching the ticket. I had brought it with me. I smoothed it out on the marble vanity. It was crinkled where my father had held it. The bright colors looked garish against the tasteful beige stone. Introduction to Scratch-Off Games. Match any of your numbers to the winning numbers. Win prize shown. It was ridiculous. It was pathetic. But then I thought about Grandma Evelyn. I thought about the steel in her grip. I thought about the way she had looked at the room, like she was watching a pack of wolves circling a wounded animal. Call Miles Kitteridge. Something shifted in my chest. It was a small click, like a lock tumbling into place. For 33 years, I have taken the high road. I have been the good daughter. I have been the quiet sister. I have accepted the scraps and said thank you. I have let them make me small because I thought that if I made myself small enough, they would stop trying to crush me. I was wrong. They did not want me small. They wanted me invisible. I stared at the ticket. They thought this was a joke. They thought this was a symbol of my worthlessness. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a coin. It was a quarter. I looked at my reflection one last time. The woman in the mirror did not look polite anymore. She did not look grateful. She looked cold. I am done being the punchline. I pressed the coin against the latex coating of the ticket. The scratching sound was loud in the small, tiled room. It sounded like something tearing. It sounded like something beginning. I did not know it yet, but the woman who walked into this bathroom was not the same woman who was going to walk out. Kennedy Long, the doormat, was dying on the bathroom floor. And something else was waking up. To understand why I stood in that bathroom scratching a piece of cheap cardboard with the desperation of a drowning woman. You have to understand the 4 hours that preceded it. You have to understand the architecture of a long family gathering. It is not a dinner party. It is a court proceeding where the verdicts are handed down in the form of compliments and dismissals, and the hierarchy is reinforced with every pass of the salt shaker. My evening had begun at 2 in the afternoon. I arrived early because I always arrive early. I was carrying a heavy ceramic dish wrapped in 2 layers of thermal towels. I had spent 6 hours the previous day making a truffle and Gruyere gratin from scratch. I had grated the cheese by hand until my knuckles were raw. I had sourced the truffle oil from a specialty importer. It was the kind of dish that required patience, precision, and care. I walked through the front door, struggling with the weight of the dish and my purse. My mother was in the foyer, adjusting a floral arrangement that already looked perfect. She glanced at me, her eyes scanning my outfit, a sensible navy dress that I had bought specifically for today, and gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod. It was the nod a general gives to a foot soldier. I greeted her and held up the dish. I told her it was the gratin she had mentioned liking 3 years ago. She did not smile. She gestured vaguely toward the kitchen without stopping her flower arrangement. She told me to just put it in the back somewhere. Maybe on the laundry room counter if there was no space in the kitchen. She said the caterers had brought a lot of sides, so we might not even need it. But it was nice of me to try. Nice of me to try. I carried my 6 hours of labor into the laundry room and set it down next to a pile of unwashed linen napkins. Later that night, I would see it still sitting there, cold and untouched, while the family raved about the caterer's instant mashed potatoes. The dynamic shifted tectonically at 4 o'clock. That was when Mallory arrived. She did not walk in. She made an entrance. The front door swung open, and a gust of cold November air brought her in, followed by her husband, Grant. Mallory was wearing a camel hair coat that probably cost more than my car. Her hair was a perfect cascade of blonde waves that looked effortless, but undoubtedly took 3 hours in a salon chair. My mother abandoned the flowers. My father emerged from the den where he had been watching football. They descended on her like pilgrims reaching a shrine. My mother held her face in both hands, cooing about how stunning she looked, calling her our girl, as if I were just a neighbor who had wandered in. My father took her coat, handling it with reverence, and told her she looked like a movie star. I stood by the coat closet, holding a wire hanger, waiting to take Grant's jacket. I was 5 feet away, but I might as well have been in another time zone. Then there was Grant Holloway. My brother-in-law is a man who was built in a laboratory designed to impress suburban parents. He is 35, has a smile that shows exactly the right amount of teeth, and works in finance. If you ask him what he actually does, the answer is a soup of buzzwords. He manages assets, he optimizes portfolios, he leverages synergies. He handed me his coat without looking at me. He did not say hello. He just extended his arm, assuming a hanger would appear, and continued talking to my father about interest rates. I hung up the coat. It smelled of expensive scotch and arrogance. For the next 2 hours, I ceased to be a family member and became the event coordinator. This is my role. I am the practical one. I am the one who knows where the extra wine glasses are. I am the one who remembers that Uncle Jerry is diabetic and Aunt Linda is allergic to shellfish. My father sat in his leather armchair, holding court with a glass of bourbon. Every 20 minutes, he would summon me. He would not ask. He would announce needs. Kennedy, we are low on ice. Kennedy, check on the turkey. Kennedy, someone spilled red wine on the rug in the foyer. When I returned with a fresh bucket of ice, he looked at Grant and said that I was so capable. He said it with a tone of heavy satisfaction. He told Grant that it was a blessing to have a daughter who was so useful. Useful, that is the word they use to dress up servitude. They do not call me smart. They do not call me talented. They call me capable. They call me useful. It is the way you talk about a sturdy pickup truck, not a human being. Dinner was a masterclass in social stratification. Grant sat to my father's right. Mallory sat to his left. I was placed at the end of the table, near the swinging kitchen door, next to my 14-year-old cousin who spent the entire meal playing video games under the table. Grant dominated the conversation. He always does. He tells stories that are designed to make everyone else at the table feel slightly smaller. He talked about a deal he had just closed in London. He described the boardroom, the tension, the millions of dollars on the line. He talked about taking a private jet to the Hamptons for a weekend with a client. The relatives ate it up. They leaned in, eyes wide, chewing their turkey while Grant spun his tales of high finance. My father nodded along, looking at Grant with the pride he had never once directed at me, but I was listening. I have always been a listener. It is the only defense I have, and because I listen, I remember. I watched Grant gesture with his fork, the gold Rolex on his wrist flashing under the chandelier. He said the London deal closed last Tuesday. He said it was a grueling 48-hour negotiation. I took a sip of water and frowned internally. Last Tuesday, Grant had posted a photo on Instagram from a golf course in Florida. I remembered it because Mallory had commented on it with 3 heart emojis. 10 minutes later, he was talking about his position at the firm. He called himself a senior managing partner. Last Thanksgiving, he had been a vice president. The year before that, he was a director. In the corporate world, titles change. But Grant seemed to be promoting himself every 6 months. Yet, I noticed his suit. It was nice, but the cuffs were slightly frayed. And when he pulled out his phone to show a picture, the screen was cracked. Small things. Tiny fissures in the facade. He mentioned a client, a tech mogul whose name was in the news constantly. He implied they were close friends. He said they had dinner at a place that I knew for a fact had closed down 6 months ago. I looked around the table. Nobody else noticed. They were too blinded by the glare of his success. My mother was beaming. My father looked like he was mentally calculating how much money he could ask to borrow later. I caught Grant's eye for a split second. He winked at me. It was not a friendly wink. It was a challenge. It was him saying that he knew I was nobody. And even if I suspected something, nobody would believe the furniture over the golden boy. I looked down at my plate. The turkey was dry. Conversation shifted to me only once. Aunt Linda, trying to be polite, asked how my job was going. I work as a paralegal for a mid-sized firm. It is steady, demanding work. I started to answer. To tell her about a case we were preparing for trial. My mother cut in before I could finish a sentence. She waved her hand dismissively. She said that Kennedy was just plodding along as usual. She told the table that I was the sensible one. She said someone in the family had to keep their feet on the ground while Mallory reached for the stars. The table chuckled. They nodded in agreement. The practical one, the sensible one. It sounded like praise, but it felt like a cage. They were defining my limits. Mallory gets the stars. Kennedy gets the ground. Mallory gets the dream. Kennedy gets the reality. They needed me to be boring so Mallory could shine brighter by comparison. I was the gray background that made her colors pop. I felt a sudden, sharp pressure on my leg. I looked down. Under the table. Grandma Evelyn had kicked me. I looked up at her. She was sitting across from me. She had barely touched her food. Her plate was full, the gravy congealing. She was staring at Grant with an intensity that was almost frightening. She opened her mouth to speak. Her voice was raspy from disuse. She started to ask Grant a question. She asked him about the lake house. She asked if he had finished the paperwork he had brought to her at the hospital. The table went silent for a fraction of a second. My mother swooped in like a hawk. She did not let the question land. She reached over and patted Evelyn's hand, her voice dropping into that condescending nursery school tone she reserves for the elderly. She told Mom to eat her stuffing before it got cold. She said we did not need to talk about boring paperwork on a holiday. She looked at Grant and gave a small, apologetic shrug, as if to say, "Ignore her. She is senile." Grant smiled, a tight, relieved expression. He took a long drink of wine. But I saw Evelyn's face. She was not confused. She was not senile. Her jaw was set so hard, I thought her teeth might crack. I looked at her hands. They were resting on her lap, clutching that black leather purse. Grandma Evelyn never carried a purse inside the house. She usually left it in the bedroom. But tonight, the strap was wrapped twice around her wrist. She was guarding it. She was holding on to it like it contained the nuclear codes. I watched her for the rest of dinner. Every time Grant spoke, her fingers tightened on the leather. Every time my father praised Mallory. Evelyn's eyes flicked to me. I realized then that she was the only other person in the room who was not watching the play. She was watching the actors. The dinner dragged on. Dessert came. The gifts were given. The cruise for Mallory. The lottery ticket for me. The laughter. The humiliation. But as I sat there, listening to the applause for my sister's vacation, the pieces of the evening began to rearrange themselves in my mind. The way my father treated me like a servant was not just habit. It was a strategy to keep me from asking questions. The way my mother silenced Evelyn was not care. It was containment. The way Grant bragged was not confidence. It was camouflage. The gifts were not about love. They never had been. Giving Mallory a $12,000 cruise was a public declaration of her value. Giving me a $2 ticket was a public declaration of mine. They were establishing the ranking for everyone to see. They were telling the aunts, the uncles, and the cousins who mattered and who did not. They were drawing a line in the sand. Mallory and Grant were the future. I was the help. I looked at the ticket lying on the tablecloth. I looked at Grant, who was now leaning back, looking satisfied, like a man who had successfully pulled off a heist. He did not know I was watching his hands. He was tapping his fingers on the table. It was a nervous tick, rhythmic, agitated. For a man who had just been gifted a luxury vacation by his in-laws, he looked strangely anxious. And Evelyn, dear, silent Evelyn, she was watching me. She was waiting for me to wake up. That was the moment the slow burn started. It was not an explosion. It was the temperature in my blood rising 1 degree at a time. I realized that my family did not just overlook me. They actively needed me to be less than them. My mediocrity was the foundation upon which they built their grandeur. If I ever stood up, their whole structure would tilt. I stood up to clear the dessert plates. My father handed me his dirty napkin without looking at me. Grant pushed his plate toward me. Mallory was busy taking a selfie with her cruise tickets. I took the plates, I walked to the kitchen, I scraped the leftovers into the trash, and then I walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and pulled the quarter out of my pocket. They wanted to see if I would get lucky. They wanted a joke. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The anger was no longer hot. It was cold. It was clinical. It was the kind of anger that clarifies things. I looked at the scratch-off ticket. I was done being the practical one. I was done being the capable one. I was about to become the dangerous one. I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped back into the hallway. The air in the corridor felt cooler than before. Or perhaps my skin was just burning. In my pocket, the lottery ticket sat against my hip like a loaded gun. I kept my hand over it, tracing the rough edge of the cardboard with my thumb. $100 million. The number repeated in my mind, a rhythmic chant that threatened to make me laugh out loud. A hysterical, jagged sound that I swallowed down deep. I needed to get back to the party. I needed to be Kennedy the furniture, Kennedy the servant, Kennedy the invisible woman. If I acted differently now, if I showed even a crack in the facade, they would notice. And I was not ready for them to notice, not yet. I walked toward the kitchen. The dining room had emptied out, the relatives migrating to the living room for coffee and the inevitable post-dinner gossip. The house was loud, a cacophony of 30 voices competing for airtime, but the kitchen was a different zone. It was the staging area. It was where the masks slipped. I approached the swinging door that separated the dining area from the kitchen. It was propped open just an inch, held by a rubber wedge. I reached out to push it open, to go in and start the hours of dishwashing that I knew awaited me, but a voice stopped my hand in midair. It was my mother's voice. It was pitched low, devoid of the sugary theatricality she used for the guests. She said that it was for the best. She said Kennedy would be miserable anyway. I froze. I stood in the shadow of the doorframe, my breath catching in my throat. I knew I should walk away. I knew that eavesdropping rarely brought anything but pain. But the new weight in my pocket, that small, crumpled piece of paper, gave me a strange kind of courage. I leaned closer. Through the crack in the door, I could see a slice of the kitchen. My mother was leaning against the granite island, holding a glass of wine. My father was next to her, loosening his tie. Mallory was sitting on a bar stool, scrolling through her phone, looking bored, and Grant was standing by the refrigerator, arms crossed, looking intense. My father spoke next. He sounded defensive. He asked if the relatives would ask questions. He said it might look strange if everyone went except me. Everyone. The word hung in the air. My mother waved her hand dismissively. She took a sip of wine. She said she had already handled it. She told them she would say I was swamped at work. She would say I had a big trial coming up and could not get the time off. She said she would tell people I did not like crowds, that I got anxious on boats. She said she was doing me a favor, really. She said I would not appreciate the experience anyway because I was too rigid. I stood there, listening to my mother rewrite my reality. I do not hate boats. I do not mind crowds. And I certainly did not have a trial that required me to work through a 10-day family vacation, but she was painting a portrait of me that suited her narrative: Kennedy the workaholic, Kennedy the neurotic, Kennedy the killjoy. Mallory did not look up from her phone. She just nodded. She said, yeah. Kennedy would probably just complain about the humidity the whole time. She said it was better this way. It was the casualness of it that hurt the most. Mallory accepted my exclusion as a natural law in her world. There was the core family: mom, dad, herself, and Grant. And then there was me, orbiting on the periphery like a satellite that had lost its signal. She did not fight for me. She did not say it would be weird without her sister. She just swiped left on her screen and agreed that I was a burden best left behind. Then Grant spoke. His voice was lower than the others. It was smooth, confident, and chilled me to the bone. He said we needed to focus. He said the tickets were just the cover. He said it was better that I was not around when they finalized things. Finalize things. My stomach turned over. The phrase was sharp, specific. You finalize a contract. You finalize a sale. You finalize a divorce. You do not finalize a vacation. Grant continued. He said that with me out of the way, they could move faster. He said I asked too many questions. He said I was the only one who actually read the fine print. My father chuckled nervously. He said Grant gave me too much credit. He said I was just fussy, not smart. Grant shook his head. He said I was observant. He said he did not want me hovering over his shoulder while he got everything signed. He said the timing had to be perfect. He said the notary was meeting them at the port before they boarded. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. What were they signing? What required a notary at a cruise port? And why was my absence the key ingredient to their success? I looked through the crack again. Grant was looking at my parents with a look I had never seen before. It was not the look of a son-in-law trying to impress. It was the look of a partner in crime. It was the look of a man who was steering the ship. I realized then that the cruise was not a gift. It was an extraction. They were removing themselves from the scene, and they were removing me from the equation. They were creating a window of opportunity where I would be alone in the city, unaware of what was happening in the middle of the ocean. Or perhaps what was happening right here while they were gone. I had heard enough. I could have retreated. I could have gone back to the bathroom and pretended I had never left. But the anger that had started as a spark was now a steady flame. I pushed the door open. The conversation in the kitchen died instantly. It was like someone had cut the power cord to a radio. My mother straightened up, her hand going to her throat. My father coughed. Mallory looked up, blinking. Grant did not move. He just stared at me, his eyes narrowing slightly, calculating how much I had heard. I walked into the room. I kept my face blank. I went to the sink and picked up a sponge. I squeezed it, watching the soapy water run over my fingers. I asked, keeping my voice light, if I had heard correctly. I asked if they were all going on the cruise. The silence stretched for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a long time in a conversation. It is enough time for a lie to be born. My mother recovered first. She put on her best smile, the one she uses for neighbors she dislikes. She walked over and touched my arm. She said yes, sweetheart. She said they had decided to make it a family trip. She said Dad and she were going to tag along to celebrate their anniversary. She said Grant and Mallory needed the support. I looked at her. I asked, simply, "What about me?" My mother sighed. It was a tragic, practiced sigh. She said they had talked about it for hours. She said they knew how busy I was at the firm. She said they knew I was saving for a condo and would not want to take the time off. She said they did not want to put pressure on me to spend money on flights and extras, since the package only covered 4 people. The lie was seamless. It was built on the foundation of my supposed poverty, the poverty they mocked, the poverty they reinforced. I looked at my father. He could not meet my eyes. He was studying the label on the wine bottle. I looked at Mallory. She shrugged. She said honestly, "Kennedy, it is going to be a lot of drinking and partying." She said I would hate it. She said I could use the quiet time at home to relax. I turned to Grant. He was still watching me. He was the predator in the room. He knew I was not buying it. He wanted to see if I would challenge him. I asked him what he meant by finalizing things. The room went dead still. Grant did not blink. He smiled, and it was a terrifying expression. It was a smile that said, "I can hurt you and you cannot stop me." He said I must have misheard. He said they were talking about finalizing the excursion itinerary. He said they had to book the shark diving tour before it sold out. He asked if I wanted to come shark diving. He asked if I thought I could handle the deep water. It was a taunt. He knew I knew he was lying. He was daring me to call him out in front of my parents. Knowing they would take his side, they always took his side. He was the golden boy. I was the furniture. I forced myself to smile back. It took every ounce of control I possessed. I squeezed the sponge so hard, I felt my fingernails digging into my palm. I said no. I said he was right. I said I probably would not enjoy it. I said I had a lot of work to do anyway. The tension in the room broke. My mother exhaled loudly. She said she knew I would understand. She said I was always so practical. And then, the air in the room changed again. It did not get warmer. It got heavier. I turned toward the doorway leading to the back hall. Grandma Evelyn was standing there. She had not made a sound. She was leaning on her cane, her small frame dwarfed by the oversized archway. She was wearing her wool cardigan, even though it was warm in the kitchen, and she was watching us. The chatter stopped again. My mother's smile faltered. There is something about Evelyn's presence that acts as a truth serum. She strips away the polish. Evelyn walked into the kitchen. Her steps were slow, shuffling, but deliberate. She did not look at my mother. She did not look at my father or Mallory. She walked straight toward me. The room stiffened. My father shifted his weight. Grant uncrossed his arms. They were all afraid of her, in a way. They treated her like a child, but they feared her like a judge. They knew she saw things. They knew she had money, assets, and a history that they could not quite control. Evelyn stopped in front of me. She looked up. Her face was a map of wrinkles, but her eyes were clear. She reached out and took my hand. Her hand was dry and cold. She gripped my fingers. She did not say a word. She squeezed my hand, hard. It was not a comfort squeeze. It was not a hello squeeze. It was a signal. It was a pulse of urgency. It was Morse code for danger. She looked at me, and for a split second, her mask of senility dropped completely. Her eyes bored into mine. She was telling me to pay attention. She was telling me that what I had just heard was not the whole story. Then, her eyes flicked down. She looked at her purse. It was hanging on her other arm, the black leather bag. It was heavy. It bulged slightly at the bottom. She looked at the purse, then back at me. Then she looked at Grant. The look she gave Grant was pure, distilled hatred. Grant took a step back. He cleared his throat. He looked at my mother. My mother sprang into action. She moved quickly, placing herself between me and Evelyn. She used her body to break the connection, to block the line of sight. She spoke in that loud, slow voice she used for Evelyn. She said, "Okay, Mother, you look tired. It is past your bedtime." She put her arm around Evelyn's shoulders, steering her away from me. She said, "Let's get you to the car. Dad is going to drive you home to the caregiver." Evelyn resisted for a second. She planted her feet. She kept her eyes on me. She gripped her purse tighter, pulling it against her chest. Then, she let out a small, frustrated breath. She allowed herself to be turned. She allowed my mother to guide her toward the door. But as she was led away, she turned her head back one last time. She looked at me. She nodded. A tiny, almost invisible movement. My mother ushered her out, chattering about how late it was, how exhausted she must be. I stood alone in the kitchen with my father, Mallory, and Grant. My father made a joke about how Grandma was getting worse. Mallory laughed nervously. Grant did not laugh. He was watching the doorway where Evelyn had disappeared. He looked worried. I turned back to the sink. I turned on the faucet. The water rushed out, drowning out the sound of my own heart beating. I understood now. The exclusion from the cruise was not just about me being the uncool sister. It was not just about saving money. It was strategic. They needed me here, ignorant and sidelined. They needed Evelyn isolated, and they needed to be away, in international waters, with a notary. The cruelty was not a byproduct of their personality. It was a tool. They were building something, a trap of some kind, and they had just cleared the board to set it. I washed a plate. I rinsed it. I placed it in the rack. In my pocket, the lottery ticket felt hotter than ever. They thought they were playing a game against a passive opponent. They thought they were moving pieces around a board that I could not see. They were wrong. I dried my hands. I looked at Grant, who was now pouring himself another drink. His back to me. I decided right then, I was not going to sleep tonight. If they were finalizing things, I needed to know what those things were. I waited for the dinner to end. I waited for them to move to the living room. I waited for the laughter to start again. And then, while they celebrated their cleverness, I prepared to find out exactly what they were hiding. The ticket in my pocket was my shield, but the information I was about to find would be my sword. By 11 o'clock that night, the performance of The Perfect Family had moved into the living room. I could hear them from the kitchen. My father was pouring brandy, the heavy crystal decanter clinking against the glasses. My mother was laughing, a sound that became looser and louder with every glass of Chardonnay. Grant was holding court, his voice booming as he recounted another story where he was the hero. And Mallory was giggling, the sound drifting down the hallway like smoke. I was where I always was. I was at the sink. The caterers had left hours ago. They had cleared the main plates, but the dessert aftermath was mine. It was always mine. The dishwasher was humming its rhythmic, mechanical song, a low drone that grounded me while my mind raced. I wiped down the granite countertops, the smell of lemon cleaner stinging my nose, erasing the sticky remnants of cranberry sauce and gravy. I was alone, but I was not lonely. For the first time in my life, I felt a strange clarity. The isolation that usually felt like a punishment now felt like a vantage point. I dried my hands on a dish towel and looked around the kitchen. It was spotless. My work here was done, but I was not ready to leave. The conversation I had overheard earlier, the mention of finalizing things, the cruise, the exclusion was burning a hole in my chest. I needed more than just overheard whispers. I needed proof. I knew my father's habits. When he drank brandy, he got sloppy. He would leave doors unlocked. He would leave papers out. He relied on the invisible machinery of the household, meaning me to tidy up his mess, to file his receipts, to make his life look orderly. I walked out of the kitchen, moving softly on the hardwood floors. The laughter from the living room was a shield, as long as they were entertaining each other. They were not watching me. I slipped past the open archway of the living room, catching a glimpse of Grant's back. He was gesturing with a cigar, looking like a king on his throne. I turned left and walked down the short hallway to my father's study. The door was ajar. My father never closed it all the way. He liked to feel accessible, even if he never actually wanted to be disturbed. I pushed it open with one finger and stepped inside. The room smelled of stale tobacco and old leather. It was a masculine room, designed to intimidate, with dark wood paneling and bookshelves filled with encyclopedias that nobody had opened since 1995. My father's desk was a massive mahogany slab that dominated the center of the room. Usually, I would just collect the empty glasses, empty the trash bin, and leave. But tonight, I walked around the desk to the chair. It was a disaster. My father projects an image of absolute control, but his desk told a different story. Papers were scattered in chaotic piles. Unopened envelopes were stacked like leaning towers. It was the desk of a man who was drowning and trying to hide the water level. I started sifting. I did not know what I was looking for, but I knew I would recognize it when I saw it. The first thing that caught my eye was a splash of red ink. It was an envelope from the utility company. Final notice, past due. I frowned. My parents lived in a house worth $2 million. They drove cars that cost more than my annual salary. How could they be missing utility payments? I dug deeper. Underneath a stack of golf magazines, I found a letter from a credit card company. It was a collection warning. The balance was staggering. $42,000. The minimum payment had not been met in 3 months. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. This was not just disorganization. This was a collapse. The facade of wealth that my family maintained was held together by tape and delusion. But then I found the document that stopped my breath. It was not a bill. It was a loan agreement. It was thick, stapled in the corner, and looked official. I picked it up. My hands were trembling slightly, but I forced them to still. I am a paralegal. Reading contracts is what I do. It is the one thing they mock me for, the one thing that makes me boring. I read the terms. It was a private loan. The lender was not a bank. It was a limited liability company I had never heard of. Something generic like Apex Capital Solutions. The principal amount was $500,000. I scanned down to the interest rate. My eyes widened. 28%. That was not a loan. That was a death sentence. It was predatory. It was the kind of loan you take when no reputable bank will touch you. I looked at the signature line. My father's signature was there, large and looping, but right next to it was a cosigner, Grant Holloway. I stared at the name. Grant, the finance genius, the man who claimed to manage millions. Why was he co-signing a high-interest, predatory loan for my father? If he was as wealthy as he claimed, why not lend the money himself? Or why not secure a better rate through his firm, unless he could not? Unless he was just as desperate as they were. I turned the page to the collateral section. A loan of that size, with that kind of risk, required security. The description of the property was typed in standard font, but the words screamed at me. Lot 44, Blackwood Lake, single-family residence and surrounding acreage, Grandma Evelyn's cabin. The room seemed to tilt. I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep my balance. The cabin was not just a piece of property. It was Evelyn's soul. She had bought it with her late husband 50 years ago. It was the only place she was truly happy. She had told me, time and time again, that she wanted it to stay in the family. She talked about it like it was a sacred site. My father was using it as collateral for a loan he could never repay. If he defaulted, and at 28% interest, he would default, the lender would take the cabin. Evelyn would lose everything. But how the cabin belonged to Evelyn? My father could not pledge property he did not own. I frantically shuffled through the rest of the pile. There had to be something else. A deed. A power of attorney. I found it at the bottom of the stack. It was a single sheet of paper, looking innocuous compared to the thick loan agreement. Transfer authorization. It was a document authorizing the transfer of the deed from Evelyn Hartwell to my father, ostensibly for estate planning purposes. I looked at the date. October 14th. I froze. October 14th. I closed my eyes, searching my memory. October 14th. That was a Tuesday. I knew exactly where Evelyn was on October 14th. She was in the cardiac wing of St. Jude's Hospital. She had been admitted for an irregular heartbeat and severe dehydration. She was on heavy medication. I had visited her that evening. She did not even know who I was. She thought I was her sister who had died in 1980. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. Evelyn Hartwell, but it was not her signature. It was a jagged, shaky scrawl that barely resembled her name. It trailed off at the end, the ink pooling where the pen had rested too long. It was the signature of a woman who was either drugged, coerced, or having her hand guided by someone else. Rage, hot and white, flooded my veins. They had gone to her hospital room. They had taken advantage of her confusion. They had forced a pen into her hand while she was vulnerable and made her sign away her sanctuary. And Grant was in on it. He was the co-signer. He knew. But why, if the goal was just to get the loan? That was bad enough. But there was one more document clipped to the back of the transfer authorization. It was a draft, a purchase and sale agreement. It outlined the sale of the cabin from my father to a buyer. The buyer was listed as Red Fern Holdings. I stared at the name, Red Fern. Where had I heard that? It sounded familiar, but not in a business context. It sounded personal. Then I remembered, 2 years ago, Grant had told a story at Christmas about a hunting dog he had growing up, a red-bone coonhound. He had loved that dog. The dog's name was Fern, Red Fern Holdings. It was a shell company. I was certain of it. Grant was not just helping my father get a loan. He was orchestrating a sale. He was going to buy the cabin out from under my father using a shell company, likely at a fraction of its value, using the loan default as the mechanism to force the sale. My father was the mark, Evelyn was the victim, and Grant was the architect. My hands were shaking so hard, I almost dropped the paper. This was not just family drama. This was fraud. This was elder abuse. This was a criminal conspiracy happening in my father's study while they drank brandy in the next room. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I did not have much time. If Grant came in here to get a cigar, if my father came in to find a file, I was dead. I laid the documents out on the desk one by one. I turned on the flash, then immediately turned it off, realizing the light might be seen under the door. I used the ambient light from the desk lamp. Snap, the loan agreement, the interest rate. Snap, the collateral description. Snap, the transfer authorization. The date, the shaky signature. Snap, the Red Fern Holdings draft. I took pictures of every page, every clause, every signature. My mind was racing, connecting dots faster than I could process them. This was why I was excluded from the cruise. It was not because I was boring. It was not because I was poor. It was because I am a paralegal. I read contracts for a living. I check dates. I verify signatures. If I had been on that cruise, if I had been part of the finalizing process, I would have asked to see the papers. I would have noticed the date on the transfer. I would have asked who Red Fern Holdings was. They minimized me because I was the only threat to their plan. They called me practical to dismiss my intelligence. They treated me like a servant so they could talk freely in front of me. Assuming the help does not understand finance, they were wrong. The help understands everything. The help sees the trash you throw away. I finished photographing the last page. I checked my phone gallery to make sure the images were clear. They were sharp, legible, damning. I quickly restacked the papers. I had to be precise. The loan agreement on the bottom, the collection notice in the middle, the golf magazines on top. I adjusted the angle of the pile to match how I found it. I moved the crystal tumbler 2 inches to the left, exactly where it had been sitting. I took a deep breath. I smoothed down the front of my dress. I looked around the room one last time. It looked undisturbed. It looked like the messy, chaotic sanctuary of a man who thought he was in control. I walked to the door. I listened. Grant was laughing again, a loud, braying sound. "To the future," he toasted. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. "To the future," I whispered. I slipped out of the study and walked back to the kitchen. I grabbed my purse and my coat. I did not say goodbye. I did not go into the living room to kiss my parents on the cheek. I could not touch them right now. If I touched them, I might vomit, or I might scream. I walked out the back door, into the cool night air. The silence outside was a physical relief. The sky was dark, the stars hidden by clouds. I walked to my car, an 8-year-old sedan that my mother constantly suggested I trade in. I got in and locked the doors. I sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. My heart was still pounding. a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had the evidence. I knew what they were doing. But knowing was not enough. I needed to stop them. And to stop them, I needed power. I needed resources. I needed to be something other than the broke, practical daughter. I looked at the passenger seat. The lottery ticket was sitting there. I had scratched the latex off in the bathroom, revealing the numbers. But I had shoved it in my pocket before I could truly process what I was seeing. I had seen matches. I had seen the symbols. But in the heat of the moment, with the anger pulsating through me, I had not let myself believe it. It had felt like a hallucination. I started the car. The engine sputtered to life. I drove home on autopilot. The streets were empty. The world was asleep. But I was wide awake. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex. It is a modest building, beige and square. Nothing like the estate I had just left. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my unit. Inside, the apartment was quiet. It smelled of vanilla candles and clean laundry. It was my sanctuary. I locked the door and threw the deadbolt. I walked to the kitchen counter. I took the ticket out of my purse and laid it down on the laminate surface. I turned on the overhead light. It hummed, a fluorescent buzz that sounded like electricity. I pulled up the Lottery Commission website on my phone. I looked at the ticket, number 4, number 12, number 27, number 33, number 48, Powerball number 9. I looked at the screen. Winning numbers 4, 12, 27, 33, 48, Powerball 9. I read them again. I read them out loud, my voice sounding flat and strange in the empty room. 4, 12, 27. I looked at the prize amount on the screen. Jackpot $100 million. Cash option $58 million. I looked at the papers on my phone, the photos of the debt, the fraud, the betrayal. Then I looked at the ticket. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. My parents had given me this ticket to mock me. They had given it to me to remind me that my worth was negligible, that my future was a gamble I would likely lose. They had handed me the weapon that would destroy them. I did not scream. I did not dance. I did not pop a bottle of champagne. I stood there in the harsh kitchen light, staring at the numbers, and I felt the last remnants of the dutiful daughter dissolve. Kennedy the paralegal was gone. Kennedy the doormat was gone. I picked up the ticket. It felt heavy now. It felt like a gavel. I'm going to check this. I'm going to claim this. And then, I am going to make sure that by the time they get back from their cruise, they have no home to return to. I entered the numbers into the text box on the Lottery Commission's homepage. 4, 12, 27, 33, 48, Powerball 9. My fingers felt numb, like they belonged to someone else. I pressed the verify button. The screen refreshed. A banner flashed across the top in bright, celebratory colors that seemed mocking in the quiet sterility of my kitchen. Congratulations, jackpot winner. I stared at the screen. I blinked, expecting the words to change, expecting an error message to pop up saying there was a glitch or a mistake or a cruel practical joke. But the words stayed there. $100 million. I deleted the numbers. I refreshed the page. I cleared my browser history and cache. Terrified that somehow a cookie or a cached image was tricking me, I opened a different browser. I typed the website address in manually. Character by character, I entered the numbers again, reading them off the orange cardstock that was sitting on my counter. 4, 12, 27, 33, 48, Powerball 9, enter, the same banner, the same numbers, the same amount, $100 million. I sat back on the high stool at my kitchen island. I waited for the scream. I waited for the urge to jump up and down, to pop a bottle of wine, to dance around the living room like they do in the commercials. But the scream did not come. The joy did not come. Instead, a profound, heavy silence settled over me. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. Filling my lungs, I felt cold. My hands were shaking, not with excitement, but with a tremor that felt like shock. I looked at the ticket. It was a piece of paper. It was worth more than the entire net worth of everyone I knew combined. It was dangerous. My body refused to celebrate. It went into survival mode. My heart rate slowed down, thumping hard and deliberate against my ribs. My vision sharpened. I looked at the door to make sure the deadbolt was thrown. I looked at the blinds to make sure they were drawn tight. I was suddenly acutely aware of how fragile my safety was. 10 minutes ago, I was Kennedy Long, the invisible paralegal. Now, I was a target. I picked up my phone again. I did not text anyone. I did not call my best friend. I opened a private browsing tab and typed a question into the search bar: what to do after winning the lottery. The results populated instantly. There were articles from financial advisors, legal blogs, and news stories about winners who had lost everything. I clicked on the first 3 links. The advice was identical, repeated in bold letters, underlined for emphasis. Tell no one. Do not sign the ticket yet. Hire a lawyer. Hire a financial planner. Remain anonymous if the state allows it. Tell no one. The words echoed in my head. Tell no one. It should have been hard advice to follow. Most people would want to call their mother, their father, their sister. But as I sat there, the image of my mother's face in the kitchen flashed in my mind. I saw Grant's predatory smile. I saw my father's signature on the predatory loan. If I told them, I would never see a dime of this money. They would guilt me. They would manipulate me. Grant would offer to manage it for me, and within a year, the money would be in an offshore account under his name, and I would be back to being the useful furniture. Or worse. I looked at the photos I had taken in my father's study. The loan shark debt, the shell company. These were desperate people. Desperate people do desperate things. If they knew I was holding a ticket worth $100 million, what would they do to get it? Would they sue me? Would they claim the ticket was a family gift and therefore family property? Would they try to have me declared incompetent? The paranoia was instant and suffocating. I needed help. I needed a professional. I needed someone who was not family. Then, the memory hit me. It cut through the static in my brain like a knife. Call Miles Kitteridge. Grandma Evelyn's voice, the urgency in her grip, the way she had mouthed the name while my family laughed at me. Miles Kitteridge. I had assumed he was just some old friend of hers, maybe a doctor or a neighbor she wanted me to check on. But Evelyn was not senile. She was sharp. She knew about the loan. She knew about the cabin. And she had told me to call him. I opened a new search tab. I typed in the name, Miles Kitteridge. The first result was a professional biography for a law firm in the city. Kitteridge and Associates. Boutique litigation and estate planning. I clicked the link. A face stared back at me. Miles Kitteridge was not an old man. He looked to be in his late 40s, with silvering hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every trick in the book and were unimpressed by all of them. His bio was impressive. Former prosecutor, specialist in complex asset recovery, high net worth estate planning, and fraud litigation. Fraud litigation. My grandmother had not just given me a name, she had given me a weapon. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was nearly midnight. No law firm would be open, but I could not wait. I could not sit in this apartment alone with this ticket and these secrets until 9 in the morning. I felt like the walls were closing in. I scrolled down the contact page. There was an office number, a fax number, and then, at the very bottom, in smaller print, for urgent client matters, it was a mobile number. I hesitated. Was winning the lottery an urgent client matter? Was finding out your family was defrauding your grandmother urgent? Yes. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I almost hung up. I told myself I was being crazy calling a stranger at midnight. Then, the line clicked open. A voice answered. It was deep, groggy, but alert. This is Miles. I froze. I had not expected him to actually answer. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I was suddenly terrified. What if he was part of it? What if he was Grant's lawyer? What if I was walking into a trap? Hello, the voice said. Sharper this time. I took a breath. I forced my voice to work. Mr. Kitteridge, I said, my name is Kennedy Long. I am Evelyn Hartwell's granddaughter. There was a pause on the other end, a long silence. I could hear the rustle of sheets, the sound of someone sitting up in bed. Kennedy, he said. His tone changed completely. The grogginess vanished. He sounded awake, focused. I have been waiting for you to call, but I did not expect it to be this late. Is Evelyn okay? She is fine, I said quickly. Well, she is physically fine. But I have a situation. Does this situation involve the cabin, he asked. I gripped the phone tighter. He knew. Yes, I said. It involves the cabin, and the loan, and Grant Holloway, and Redfern Holdings. I heard him exhale. A sharp sound of release. Okay, he said. You found the papers. Good. Evelyn told me you were the smart one. The smart one. Not the practical one, not the useful one, the smart one. Tears pricked my eyes. Hot and sudden. Mr. Kitteridge. I said, there is something else. Something happened tonight. Tell me, he said. I looked at the ticket on the counter. The orange and white cardstock seemed to glow under the fluorescent light. My parents gave me a lottery ticket for Thanksgiving, I said, as a joke. Okay, he said, his voice patient but confused. I won. I said, that is nice. Kennedy, he said, how much did you win? $500? No. I said. My voice was a whisper. I won the jackpot. The silence on the line was absolute. It stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. Say that again, he said. His voice was very quiet. I won the jackpot. I repeated, $100 million. I heard a sound on the other end that might have been a pen dropping onto a nightstand. Where is the ticket, he asked. The question came out like a bullet. Fast. Hard. It is on my kitchen counter. I said, is your door locked? Yes. Are you alone? Yes. Do not touch it, he commanded. Listen to me very carefully. Kennedy, do not sign it. Don't photograph it and put it online. Don't tell your mother. Don't tell your father. Don't tell your sister. And for God's sake, don't tell Grant Holloway. I haven't told anyone. I said, you're the first person I called. Good, he said. That's very good. Now I need you to take the ticket. Put it in a Ziploc bag so it stays dry. Then hide it somewhere that isn't obvious, not in a cookie jar. Not under the mattress. Do you have a hollowed-out book? A safe? I have a fireproof box in the back of my closet. I said, put it in there, he said. Lock it. Keep the key on you at all times. I did exactly that. I walked to the bedroom with the phone tight to my ear. I found the box, slid the ticket inside, and snapped the lock shut. My hands were still trembling. It's done. I said, okay, Miles said. Now we need to talk about everything else. Because if you have what I think you have regarding the cabin, and you now have this money, you are in a very unique and very dangerous position. I know. I said, I heard them talking. They are going on a cruise. They said they were finalizing things. Miles swore softly. They are trying to close the sale while they are offshore. He said, they think Evelyn is incapacitated. They think you are out of the loop. They excluded me from the trip. I said, to keep me away. He made a noise of agreement. Of course they did. Kennedy, listen to me. Your grandmother contacted me 4 months ago. She hired me to update her trust. She was worried. She told me she suspected Grant was moving money around. She suspected your father was drowning in debt. She was trying to protect the cabin. But they got to her at the hospital before we could finalize the protective structure. I looked at the fireproof box. The 2 threads of my life, the family trauma and the sudden fortune, were weaving together into a knot. She tried to tell me. I said. She squeezed my hand. She knew you were the only one she could trust. Miles said. And now, you are the only one with the resources to stop them. I have $100 million, I said. It still felt absurd to say it. You have leverage, Miles corrected. Money is just fuel. You have to decide how you want to use it. If we do this right, we can save the cabin, we can expose Grant, but we have to move fast, and we have to be absolutely silent. I understand. I said, I want you to meet me at my office tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, he said. We will draft a retainer agreement. We will secure the ticket. We will set up a blind trust to claim the money so your name does not appear in the press immediately. And then, we will look at those documents you found. 7 o'clock. I said, and Kennedy Miles said, his voice softened slightly. Yes. Do not text anyone tonight. Do not answer your phone if your family calls. If they ask why you are not answering, say you were sleeping. Say you have a migraine. Lie. You are going to have to get very comfortable with lying to them for the next few weeks. Can you do that? I thought about the years of smiling while they insulted me. I thought about the years of pretending I did not mind being the servant. I thought about the years of swallowing my pride. I have been practicing for this my whole life. I said, I will see you at 7. Miles said, and Kennedy, congratulations. He hung up. I lowered the phone. I stood in the darkness of my bedroom. The fireproof box was tucked behind my winter boots. Inside it sat the future, but outside, the past was waiting to be dismantled. I walked back to the kitchen. I looked at the spot on the counter where the ticket had been. I realized then that the money was not the point. The money was the means. The point was the look on Grant's face when he realized he had lost. The point was saving Evelyn. The point was finally, after 33 years, standing up from the kids' table and taking my place at the head of the room. I went to the sink and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady now. The numbness was receding, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was not going to sleep tonight. I had a war to plan. The offices of Kitteridge and Associates were located on the 34th floor of a glass tower in downtown, a world away from the suffocating beige walls of my parents' house. I arrived at exactly 6:55 in the morning. The city was still waking up, a gray fog clinging to the skyscrapers. But inside the firm, the air was crisp and smelled of expensive coffee and leather bindings. Miles Kitteridge was waiting for me. He was not the grandfatherly figure I had imagined when Evelyn first whispered his name. He was sharp, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him with military precision, and he had the kind of eyes that dismantled you before you even sat down. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He shook my hand, a firm, dry grip, and ushered me into a conference room that overlooked the city skyline. On the mahogany table, a file was already open. He gestured for me to sit. He sat opposite me, clasping his hands together. He looked at me for a long moment, assessing the dark circles under my eyes and the tension in my jaw. He told me we had a lot of ground to cover and very little time. He asked for the ticket first. I handed him the Ziploc bag from my purse. He did not gasp. He did not smile. He treated it like a piece of evidence in a murder trial. He examined it, verified the numbers against a printout on his desk, and then nodded once. He pressed a button on the intercom and instructed his paralegal to bring in the safe deposit box. Once the ticket was secured, locked away in a vault that looked capable of surviving a nuclear blast, the atmosphere in the room shifted. We were no longer talking about luck. We were talking about war. Miles slid the open file toward me. He told me that what he was about to show me was confidential. But given the circumstances, and the power of attorney documents he was about to have me sign, it was necessary. I looked down. It was a legal document titled, The Evelyn Hartwell Revocable Living Trust. I read the date. It had been drafted 4 months ago. I looked at Miles. I asked him what this meant. He leaned forward. He said that my grandmother was not the confused, helpless old woman my family liked to portray her as. He said she came to him because she was terrified. She knew her health was declining, but she was far more afraid of her daughter than she was of death. She told Miles that my mother had been trying to gain access to her primary accounts for years, always framing it as helping, always trying to simplify things. Evelyn knew that simplify meant liquidate, so she created this trust. It placed all her major assets, including her investment accounts and the lakeside cabin, into a protected structure. And then came the part that made my breath catch in my throat. Miles pointed to a paragraph on the 3rd page. Successor trustee and primary beneficiary Kennedy Long. I stared at my name typed in black ink. I felt a sudden, sharp stinging in my eyes. She had chosen me. In a family that treated me like furniture, She had seen me as the guardian of her legacy. I asked Miles why she had never told me. He said she wanted to protect me. She knew that if my mother or Grant found out I held the keys to the kingdom, they would make my life a living hell. She wanted to wait until the trust was fully funded and unassailable before she broke the news, but they had moved faster than she anticipated. Miles pulled out a second stack of papers. These were copies of the documents I had photographed in my father's study, alongside hospital records he had subpoenaed. He laid them out side by side. The contrast was sickening. He pointed to the signature on the trust document from 4 months ago. It was Evelyn's handwriting, elegant, looping, firm. Then he pointed to the transfer authorization dated October 14th. The difference was violent. The October signature was a jagged, trailing scrawl. It looked like a seismograph reading of an earthquake. Miles tapped the hospital record. He said that on October 14th, Evelyn was administered a high dose of sedatives at 2 in the afternoon. He said the visitor log showed Grant Holloway and my father checking in at 2:45. The document was time-stamped at 3 o'clock. He looked at me, his face grim. He said this was not just a bad deal. He said it was a textbook case of coercion and undue influence. They caught her when she was chemically incapacitated. They likely guided her hand or told her she was signing a medical release form. It was fraud, plain and simple. But then he dropped the next piece of information, the one that twisted the knife. He told me about the cabin. I had always thought the cabin was just a sentimental place for Evelyn. I thought she loved the lake and the memories of my grandfather. But Miles explained that it was more than that. The land the cabin sat on had been in her family for 3 generations before she even married. It was the only thing she owned that was truly hers. She had been working with Miles to place the cabin into a specific type of legacy arrangement. It was a clause that would forbid the sale of the property for 100 years. She wanted it to be a sanctuary for the women of the family, a place where, if everything else fell apart, we would always have a roof over our heads. She was building a safety net, and Grant was trying to turn it into a quick cash grab to cover his gambling debts or his bad investments or whatever hole he had dug for himself. Miles sat back. He told me that we had options. He outlined them with the precision of a surgeon. Option 1. We file an immediate injunction to stop the transfer. This would alert them that we know, but it would pause everything. Option 2. We petition the court for an emergency guardianship, arguing that Evelyn was vulnerable and needed protection. This would trigger a capacity evaluation, which could get messy if they had doctors on their payroll. Option 3. We attack the transaction itself. We prove the fraud. I listened, absorbing the legal strategy. It felt good to be on this side of the table. It felt empowering. But then Miles looked at his watch. He said there was a complication. He asked me if I knew exactly when the cruise ship was scheduled to depart. I told him it was leaving tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock. He nodded. He pulled a sheet of paper from a folder marked Red Fern Holdings. He said he had run a background check on the shell company. It was registered in Delaware, but the operating agreement pointed to a registered agent who shared an office address with a notary public in the port city where the cruise was departing. My stomach dropped. Miles said that Grant was smart. He knew that once the ship left international waters, communication would be spotty. He knew that if the sale closed while they were at sea, and the money was wired to an offshore account, it would be incredibly difficult to claw it back before it vanished. The closing was scheduled for tomorrow at noon, just hours before they boarded. They were going to sign the final deed, hand it to the notary, get on the boat, and toast to their success while Evelyn lost her home. I felt a surge of panic. I asked Miles if we could stop it in time. He looked at me. He asked me if I trusted him. I looked at this man who had been my grandmother's secret shield. I nodded. He said that we were going to fight this, but we were not going to do it the way they expected. He said that usually, in these cases, the victim is helpless because they lack funds. They get buried in legal fees. They get starved out. He pointed to the safe where the lottery ticket was locked. He said I was not helpless. He said I had the ultimate equalizer. He told me the first step was to secure the money. We needed to create an entity to claim the prize so that the name Kennedy Long did not appear on the evening news. If my family found out I had won before we stopped the sale, they would change their tactics. They would play the victim. They would guilt me into paying off the debt. They would use the money to cover their tracks. We spent the next hour drafting the formation documents for a limited liability company. I had to choose a name. I thought about Red Fern. I thought about the lies. I thought about the cabin. I told Miles to call it the 14th of October LLC. He raised an eyebrow, a small smile touching his lips. He typed it in. It was a reminder, a date I would never forget. Then we moved to the strategy for the cabin. I told Miles I wanted to buy the debt. I wanted to pay off the loan so they could not use the default to force the sale. Miles shook his head. He said that was the emotional response. He said if I paid the debt, I was just handing Grant $500,000 of my money. I was solving their problem. He said we needed to control the timeline. He proposed a different path. We would file a lis pendens on the property immediately. It is a legal notice that there is a pending lawsuit regarding the title of the land. No title company in the world would ensure a sale with a lis pendens on the record. It would freeze the transaction cold. But we had to time it perfectly. If we filed it too early, Grant might find another way. If we filed it too late, the sale would close. We had to file it tomorrow morning, exactly when the courthouse opened. I sat there, realizing the magnitude of what we were doing. I was declaring war on my own parents. I was sabotaging my sister's husband. I asked Miles if this made me as bad as them. Miles took off his glasses and cleaned them with a silk cloth. He looked tired but resolute. He asked me to remember the look on Evelyn's face at dinner. He asked me to remember the feeling of being the punchline. He said that bad people rely on good people being afraid to make a scene. He said that Grant counted on me being passive. He counted on me being the girl who cleaned up the dishes and stayed quiet. He said I was not doing this to hurt them. I was doing this to stop them from hurting Evelyn. He leaned across the table. His voice dropped to a whisper, intense and gravelly. He said that I had $100 million and the truth on my side. He said I could burn their house down if I wanted to. I could sue them into oblivion. I could humiliate them publicly. But then he said the words that would anchor me for the rest of the fight. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Kennedy, if you want to win this, we do not fight loud. We fight clean. We use the law. We use the truth. We do not give them a single thing to use against us. We are going to be surgical." I nodded. I felt the shift inside me solidify. The anger was still there, but it was no longer a wildfire. It was a laser. I told him to file the papers. I told him to claim the ticket. I told him to prepare the lawsuit. And then I stood up. I had to go back to work. I had to go back to being the paralegal. I had to go to the port tomorrow to say goodbye to my family and pretend I knew nothing. I walked out of the office into the bright morning sun. The city looked different now. It looked like a board game, and for the first time in my life, I was holding the dice. They were finalizing things. So was I. The farewell brunch was held at a waterfront restaurant with a view of the harbor where the cruise ship sat like a white floating city. I was not invited as a guest. I was invited as the logistics coordinator. My mother had texted me at 6 a.m. with a list of tasks. I needed to pick up the floral arrangements for the table. I needed to ensure the seating chart placed the most influential relatives next to Grant. I needed to be there early to handle the valet tips. I performed every task with the efficiency of a machine. I arranged the hydrangeas. I placed the place cards. I smiled at the hostess. Inside my chest, my heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm of anticipation. I was a spy in the house of my enemy, and this was their final meal before the trap snapped shut. When the family arrived, they were swept up in a cloud of performative joy. Mallory was wearing a white sundress and a wide-brimmed hat, looking every inch the heiress she believed she was. Grant was wearing linen and loafers, his sunglasses pushed up into his hair, shaking hands with the forced vigor of a politician running for re-election. My parents were beaming, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch and matriarch who were treating their successful children to a well-deserved break. I stood by the maitre d' stand, holding my mother's extra tote bag. Mallory breezed past me, smelling of coconut sunscreen and expensive vanilla. She stopped for a fraction of a second, not to say hello, but to issue an order. She touched my arm lightly. She said that she hoped I had the key to the house. She said that someone had to keep Mom's plants alive while they were gone. She laughed. A light, tinkling sound that was meant to be charming but felt like a needle. She said she knew I was good at keeping things alive. She meant it as a compliment to my usefulness. I was the gardener. I was the caretaker. I was the one who stayed behind to water the soil while they enjoyed the fruit. I smiled at her. It was a genuine smile, which seemed to confuse her. I told her not to worry. I told her I would take care of everything that mattered. She blinked, sensing a double meaning she could not quite grasp, and then turned away to wave at a cousin. We sat down to eat. I was placed at the far end of the table again, near the kitchen traffic. But today I did not mind. From this vantage point, I could see Grant clearly. He was drinking mimosas fast. Too fast. He was laughing too loudly at my father's jokes. His leg was bouncing under the table, shaking the silverware. He checked his phone every 3 minutes, tapping the screen with an aggression that betrayed his calm exterior. He was a man waiting for a wire transfer to clear. He was a man waiting for a notary to show up. He caught me watching him. He smirked. It was a reflex, a way to reassert dominance over the person he considered the weakest in the room. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his orange juice and champagne. He called out my name. The table quieted down. They always did when Grant spoke. He asked if I had cashed in my big prize yet. He asked if I was going to invest my $2 in a high-yield savings account. The relatives chuckled. It was the same old joke. Kennedy the poor relation. Kennedy the charity case. I looked at him. I thought about the fireproof box in my closet. I thought about the document Miles and I had signed yesterday, forming the 14th of October LLC. I thought about the $58 million that would be deposited into a blind trust account within 10 days. I picked up my water glass. I looked him in the eye and said that luck surprises people. My voice was sweet. It was unreadable. It lacked the defensive edge they were used to. Grant faltered. His smirk slipped for a second. He looked at me, trying to find the sarcasm, but I gave him nothing. I was a mirror. He cleared his throat and looked away. He said that luck was for people who did not know how to work. I did not respond. I just took a sip of water. The brunch ended. The bill came. My father reached for it. But Grant made a show of grabbing the check. He declared that this was on him. He said he wanted to treat the family before they set sail. He handed the waiter a black credit card. It was heavy, metal, designed to impress. We waited. The conversation lulled. The waiter returned. He did not look impressed. He looked uncomfortable. He leaned down and whispered something to Grant. Grant frowned. He said that was impossible. He said to run it again. The waiter walked away. Grant laughed nervously. He told the table that the fraud algorithms were so sensitive these days. He said they probably flagged the large amount because he was traveling. My father nodded sympathetically. He said banks were a nuisance. The waiter returned again. He was holding the card with 2 fingers, offering it back to Grant like it was contaminated. He said quietly that the card was declined. He asked if there was another form of payment. The silence at the table was thick. Grant's face turned a mottled shade of red. He patted his pockets. He pulled out another card. He handed it over. I watched his hands. They were shaking. He was overextended. He was maxed out. He was relying on the sale of the cabin to cover the crater in his finances. And until that money hit, he was walking a tightrope over a canyon. The second card went through, but the air had changed. The invincibility was gone. The panic was leaking through the cracks. We drove to the cruise terminal in a caravan. I drove my parents' SUV with the luggage. Grant and Mallory rode with them. At the drop-off zone, the chaos was palpable. Porters were shouting, horns were honking, and the humidity was rising. Grant was frantic on his phone. He was pacing away from the group, shouting at someone on the other end. I heard fragments of his conversation. I heard him say he needed the notary there in 20 minutes. I heard him say the wire had to hit today. Mallory was standing by the curb, looking fragile. The incident with the credit card had shaken her. She looked at Grant. Then she looked at me. She walked over to me. She lowered her voice. She asked me if I could do her a huge favor. I asked her what she needed. She looked at her shoes. She said that Grant was having some issues with his bank access because of the travel flags. She said they needed some cash for tips and the initial onboard hold. She asked if I could transfer her $500. I stared at her. My sister, the princess, asking the pauper for $500. It was the first time in her life she had ever asked me for money. Usually, she was the one offering to buy me lunch with a pitying smile. She promised she would pay me back as soon as they got Wi-Fi. I looked at Grant, still screaming into his phone. I could have given her the money. $500 was microscopic to me now. It was less than a rounding error, but Miles's voice echoed in my head. We do not fight loud. We fight clean. Helping them now would be enabling the delusion. It would be patching the hole in the ship they were using to flee the scene of a crime. I shook my head gently. I told her I could not do that. Her eyes widened. She looked shocked. She started to argue. She said, "Please, Kennedy, it is just $500. I cut her off. I kept my voice calm, almost professional. I told her to ask Grant. I told her that he was the finance expert. I said surely he had a backup plan. I threw their own narrative back in her face. If Grant was the genius, let him solve it. If I was the incapable one, how could I possibly help? Mallory recoiled, as if I had slapped her. She looked at me with a mixture of confusion and betrayal. She opened her mouth to say something cruel, but my father called out to her. The porters were taking the bags. It was time to go. She turned and ran to catch up with them. I stood by the SUV and watched them go. My parents waved distractedly. Mallory did not look back. Grant was still on the phone, disappearing into the terminal doors without a backward glance. I waited until they were inside. I waited until I saw them move through the security checkpoint. Then, I pulled out my phone. I dialed Miles. I told him they were inside. I told him they were boarding. He answered immediately. He said good. He said he was at the courthouse. He said he was filing the lis pendens now. I stood there in the exhaust fumes of the cruise terminal and closed my eyes. I imagined the stamp coming down on the paper. Clack. With that sound, the trap was sprung. Grant would meet the notary. They would sign the papers. They would try to wire the deed to the title company. And the title company would run a final check and see a red flag the size of a billboard. Pending litigation. Title dispute. Sale blocked. Grant would be stuck on a ship in the middle of the ocean, watching his deal collapse, unable to run, unable to fix it, unable to do anything but scream into the void. I got back into the car. I did not drive home. I drove north. I drove for 2 hours, leaving the city and the ocean behind. I drove until the skyscrapers turned into suburbs, and the suburbs turned into pine trees. I turned onto the gravel road that led to Blackwood Lake. The cabin sat on a rise overlooking the water. It was a modest structure, built of cedar and stone, with a wide porch that faced the sunset. It looked quiet. It looked peaceful. It did not look like the center of a criminal conspiracy. I parked the car and walked up the steps. I did not have a key. Grant had taken Evelyn's keys, but I knew where the spare was hidden under a loose stone in the foundation. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled of wood smoke and old books. It smelled like Evelyn. I walked to the mantel. There was a picture of me and Mallory as children. Swimming in the lake. We looked happy. We looked like sisters. I took the picture down and laid it face down on the table. I walked back out to the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. I took my phone out. I took a picture of the view, the lake, the trees, the sturdy railing of the porch. I opened my social media app. I almost never posted. My family followed me, but they rarely engaged with my content unless it was to critique my appearance. I uploaded the photo. I typed a caption. 5 words. Restoring something that matters. I posted it. It was a message. They might not see it for 2 days. They might not see it until they bought the Wi-Fi package in a panic. But when they did see it, they would know. They would know that while they were playing at being rich, I was sitting on the property they tried to steal. They would know that the furniture had moved. I sat on the swing and watched the dark water. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Miles. It is filed. The sale is dead. The title company just rejected the transfer. I looked at the message. I looked at the lake. For the first time in 33 years, I did not feel small. I felt vast. I felt like the deep water quiet on the surface, but heavy enough to crush anything that tried to breathe underwater. The news cycle moves faster than a cruise ship. By the time my family reached their first port of call, the story had already broken. The State Lottery Commission issued a press release announcing that the largest jackpot in state history had been claimed. They did not release a name. They released the name of the entity that claimed it. The 14th of October, LLC. The news report also mentioned the location where the winning ticket was purchased. It was the gas station 3 miles from my parents' house, the same gas station where my father stopped every Thursday to buy cigarettes and performative gestures of generosity. The first text arrived at 2 in the afternoon. It was from my mother. It was written in that breezy, overly casual tone she uses when she is fishing for information, but does not want to appear desperate. Hey, sweetie. Just saw a funny news story about a jackpot winner in our area. You still have that ticket Dad gave you, right? Just curious. Hope you are watering the plants. I did not reply. 10 minutes later, the first call came. I let it ring. Then came a text from my father. Kennedy. Call me. Important. Then a text from Mallory. Ken, are you seeing this OMG? Imagining if it was us? Call me. Then the floodgates opened. My phone vibrated across the coffee table like a trapped insect. They were calling back to back. They were calling from the ship's expensive satellite phone. They were calling from apps. They were panicking. I sat on my sofa, a cup of tea in my hand, and listened to the voicemails. I treated them like audition tapes for a play about greed. First, my mother. Her voice was high, breathless. Kennedy, pick up. We are just worried about you. We want to make sure you put that ticket somewhere safe. You know how scatterbrained you can be. Call us immediately. Then, my father. His voice was deep, trying to sound authoritative but cracking at the edges. Kennedy, this is your father. If you have that ticket, do not do anything. Do not sign it. Do not talk to anyone. We are coming back. We need to handle this as a family unit. Do not make any decisions without me. Then, Mallory, Ken, please pick up. Grant says, if it is you, we need to get you legal protection right away. He knows people. Just answer the phone. There was no voicemail from Grant. He was too smart for that. He knew that voicemails were evidence. I waited until 5 o'clock. I let them stew. I let them pace around their cabin, terrified that the winning ticket was sitting in the trash or, worse, in my pocket. Then, I sent a single group message. Family meeting, video call, 6 o'clock sharp. I have an announcement. I set up my laptop on the dining table. I positioned the camera so that the background was a blank white wall. No personal details. No hints of where I was. I put on a black blazer. I pulled my hair back. I looked like a news anchor delivering a verdict. At 6 o'clock, I opened the video conference link. They joined instantly, the screen filled with the chaotic, brightly colored interior of a cruise ship lounge. They were huddled together on a tropical print sofa. The lighting was bad, a mix of harsh neon and aggressive sunlight streaming in from a porthole. They looked terrible. My mother's makeup was smudged. My father's face was flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. Mallory looked anxious, biting her thumbnail, and Grant sat on the edge of the sofa, his eyes darting around the screen, scanning my face, scanning my background. Kennedy, my mother cried out, her voice distorted by the lag. Oh, thank God. We have been trying to reach you for hours. Where are you? My father demanded. Are you at home? Is the ticket safe? I folded my hands on the table. I kept my face perfectly still. Hello? I said. I can hear you fine. You do not need to shout. The ticket, Kennedy, Grant said. His voice was low, cutting through the noise of the ship's background music. Do not play games. Is it the winner? I looked at him. I looked at all of them. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds. Yes, I said. It is the winner. The reaction was instantaneous and grotesque. It was like watching a bomb go off in reverse. The tension exploded into jubilation. My mother screamed. Mallory grabbed Grant's arm and shook him. My father threw his head back and laughed. A loud, barking sound of relief. "Oh my God," Mallory shrieked. "We are rich. We are actually rich. $100 million. My father shouted, slapping his knee. "I knew it. I told you. Linda. I told you I had a feeling about that ticket." My mother leaned into the camera, her face filling the frame. Her eyes were wet with tears. But they were not tears of joy for me. They were tears of salvation for herself. "Kennedy, baby," she said, "this is a miracle. A family miracle. We are going to turn the ship around. We are going to fly home at the next port. We need to get this into the family trust immediately. Grant can handle the investment side," my father said, nodding at Grant. "He knows how to structure this to minimize the tax hit." Right. Grant was the only one not cheering. He was watching me. He was smiling. But it was a tight, shark-like grimace. He was calculating his commission. He was calculating how quickly he could get power of attorney. "Kennedy," Grant said, his voice smooth. "Listen to Dad. This is complicated money. You are not equipped to handle this level of wealth. You need to transfer the ticket to a custody arrangement as soon as we get back. I will set up the accounts." I watched them celebrate. I watched them divide up the carcass of a fortune they had not earned. They had spent 30 years telling me I was worthless. And it took them exactly 30 seconds to decide that my money was their money. I reached out and pressed a key on my keyboard. "Stop," I said. I did not shout. I did not have to. The tone of my voice was so cold, so devoid of warmth, that it froze the room. They stopped. The smiles faltered. "What is it, honey?" my mother asked, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "You are in shock. We understand." "I am not in shock," I said. "I am clear, crystal clear." "What do you mean?" Mallory asked. "I mean that before we talk about the future." I said, "We need to talk about the past. Specifically, the last 4 months." Grant stiffened. He sat up straighter. "Kennedy, this is not the time," Grant said sharply. "We are on a public connection. I do not care." I said, "I have something to show you. Look at your screen." I hit the share screen button. The image on their end changed. The video of my face shrank to a small box in the corner, replaced by a high-resolution scan of a document. It was the loan agreement. I zoomed in on the numbers. Principal $500,000. Interest rate 28%. "What is this?" my father asked. He squinted at the screen. "Kennedy, what are you doing? This is a loan agreement," I said, my voice narrating the evidence like a prosecutor. "Signed by you, Dad. Co-signed by Grant Holloway." My father's face went pale. He looked at Grant. "I also have the default notice," I said, scrolling down. "You have not made a payment in 3 months. You are insolvent." "Kennedy, stop this," my mother hissed. "We can talk about this in private." "No," I said. "We are doing this now." I switched the image. It was the transfer authorization, the one with the shaky signature. "This is a document authorizing the transfer of Grandma Evelyn's cabin to Dad," I said, "dated October 14th. I paused. "Grant, where was Evelyn on October 14th? Grant did not answer. He was staring at the camera, his face a mask of fury. "She was in the hospital." I answered for him. "She was heavily sedated. I have the medical records right here." "You went into her room. You put a pen in the hand of a confused, drugged woman, and you made her sign away her home." Mallory gasped. She looked at Grant. "Grant, is that true?" "She is lying," Grant said quickly. "She is fabricating this. She is jealous because she was not invited on the trip. She is trying to ruin the moment." "Fabricating?" I asked. "Let's look at the next document." I pulled up the draft purchase agreement. This shows the sale of the cabin from Dad to a company called Red Fern Holdings. I said, "For a price that is less than half of the market value." So Grant snapped. "It is an investment firm. We found a buyer to help Dad out of a jam." I was saving the family. Kennedy, something you would know nothing about. Redfern Holdings, I repeated. I wondered about that name. It sounded familiar. I switched to the final document. This was the one Miles had found. It was the smoking gun. It was the operating agreement for Redfern Holdings, obtained through a subpoena of the registered agent in Delaware. I highlighted the name of the managing member. It was not a stranger. It was not a corporation. It was Grant Holloway. The silence on the video call was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. You were not finding a buyer. Grant, I said, you were the buyer. You were using Dad's desperation and Evelyn's dementia to buy $1 million property for pennies on the dollar. You were going to steal the cabin, flip it, and use the profit to cover your own gambling debts. I looked at Mallory. Her hand was over her mouth. She was staring at her husband as if he had just turned into a monster. Mallory, I said softly, he was not saving the family. He was stripping it for parts. My father looked like he was having a stroke. He turned to Grant. You own the company. You told me it was a private equity group from Chicago. It is a structure, Grant shouted. He stood up, knocking over a drink on the table. It is a common financial structure. You people do not understand how this works. Kennedy is twisting everything. She is unstable. She has always been unstable. He pointed a shaking finger at the camera. Listen to me. Kennedy, you are going to close that laptop. You are going to delete those files. You are going to wait until we get home. And I will fix this. If you show this to anyone, I will sue you for defamation. I will bury you. I looked at him. I looked at the sweat on his forehead. I looked at the fear in his eyes. I smiled. It was a terrifying smile. It was the smile of the executioner. You cannot sue me, Grant, I said, because you are broke, and I have $100 million. I leaned closer to the camera. And by the way, I said, I know about the notary meeting today at noon. I know you tried to close the sale before you boarded. Grant froze. Did you wonder why the title company rejected the deed, I asked? Did you wonder why the deal fell apart at the last second? Grant whispered. Me, I said. My lawyer filed a lis pendens on the property this morning. The sale is dead. The cabin is secure. And Evelyn has a new trust that protects her from all of you. My mother started to cry. It was a jagged, ugly sound. Kennedy, please, we are a family. We can fix this. We are not a family, I said. You are a corporation, and you just went bankrupt. I looked at Grant one last time. I am sending these documents to the State Attorney General's office. I said, I am sending them to the Bar Association, and I am sending them to your partners at the firm. No, Grant screamed. He lunged toward the camera, as if he could reach through the satellite connection and strangle me. Mallory screamed. My father tried to grab him. I am not asking for permission, I said, my voice calm and final. I am telling you what is happening. I moved my mouse to the red button. Enjoy the cruise, I said. I clicked end call. The screen went black. The screaming cut off instantly. I sat in the silence of my apartment. I could hear the refrigerator humming. I could hear the traffic outside. I took a deep breath. I looked at my hands. They were steady. The bomb had been detonated. The bridge had been burned. And I had never felt more at peace. The silence that followed the end of the video call was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a battlefield after the last cannon has fired, where the only thing left to do is count the casualties. I sat at my dining table, my laptop closed, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. My hands were still resting on the cool wood. I felt lighter than I had in years, but I also felt a deep, vibrating exhaustion in my bones. Then, the digital bombardment began. It started with a single vibration of my phone against the table, then another, then a continuous, angry buzz that sounded like a swarm of hornets trying to escape a jar. I picked up the phone. It was my mother. The messages were coming in a rapid-fire stream, a chaotic mix of denial, manipulation, and pure, unfiltered rage. How could you do this to us? We are your family. Grant is threatening to jump overboard because of you. You are sick. You need help. Pick up the phone. Kennedy. Now. I cannot believe I gave birth to someone so cruel. I read them with a detachment that surprised me. A week ago, these messages would have crushed me. They would have sent me spiraling into a panic attack, desperate to fix whatever I had broken, desperate to earn back their approval. But now, I saw them for what they were. They were the thrashing of a drowning animal that refuses to grab the life preserver because it is too proud to admit it cannot swim. Then came the messages from my father. They were different. They were pathetic. Kennedy, please. We can work this out. Grant was just trying to be creative with the financing. Do not ruin us. Think about the family reputation. If you talk to the authorities, your mother will not survive the stress. Do you want that on your conscience? I did not reply to any of them. I placed the phone face down on the table. There was nothing from Mallory. Her silence was louder than her mother's screaming. It was a void where my sister used to be. The next morning, the war moved from private texts to public perception. Grant, trapped on a ship with spotty internet and a crumbling empire, did the only thing a narcissist knows how to do when cornered. He attacked. He could not get to me physically, so he tried to destroy my credibility. My Aunt Linda called me at 9 a.m. She sounded breathless, torn between the thrill of gossip and genuine concern. She told me that Grant had been messaging the entire extended family group chat. He was spinning a story that was breathtaking in its audacity. He claimed that I had suffered a mental breakdown. He told everyone that the lottery win was a delusion, a hallucination brought on by stress and jealousy. He said the documents I had shown on the video call were forgeries, created by me in a fit of hysteria because I was bitter about being excluded from the cruise. He painted a portrait of me as the unstable, spinster sister who was trying to tear apart Mallory's happiness because I could not find any of my own. It was a smart move. It played into the family's existing bias. They already saw me as the quiet, slightly odd one. It was easier for them to believe that Kennedy was crazy than to believe that Grant, the golden boy with the Italian suits and the perfect smile, was a criminal. But Grant made one fatal mistake. He assumed that his victims were isolated. He assumed that Redfern Holdings was a secret that only he and I knew about. He was wrong. At 11 o'clock, Miles called me. His voice was grim but energized. He told me to turn on the local news. I walked to the living room and turned on the television. The story was not about me. It was about a woman named Clara Higgins. Clara was a 60-year-old widow who owned a small bakery on the south side of the city. She was standing in front of a microphone, her face lined with grief but her eyes burning with anger. She was holding a piece of paper that looked identical to the one I had found in my father's study. She told the reporter that 3 years ago, a man had approached her offering to help refinance her business loan. He had been charming. He had promised to save her bakery. Instead, he had tricked her into signing a deed transfer disguised as a loan modification. She had lost her building. She had lost her livelihood. The company that took her building was Redfern Holdings. The man who had charmed her was Grant Holloway. I watched the screen, my hand covering my mouth. I had thought my father and Evelyn were special targets. I had thought Grant was just desperate to cover a specific debt. But as Clara spoke, I realized the horror was much larger. Grant was not just a desperate man making a bad choice. He was a predator. He was a machine. The report mentioned that the state attorney general's office had received an anonymous tip, sent by Miles, including documents linking Redfern directly to Grant's personal accounts. That tip had broken the dam. By noon, 2 more people had come forward: a mechanic whose garage had been seized, a young couple who had lost their starter home in a lease-to-own scam. The pattern was unmistakable. Grant targeted people who were vulnerable, people who were trusting, people who did not read the fine print. He used his status and his smile to disarm them, and then he stripped them of everything they owned. My family's embarrassment was no longer a private dispute. It was becoming a statewide scandal, while the world was waking up to who Grant really was. I could only imagine what was happening inside that luxury suite on the cruise ship. I later learned the details from the ship's manifest logs and witness accounts. But the emotional truth I pieced together myself. Mallory had spent the first 24 hours in shock, sitting on the balcony, staring at the ocean, refusing to speak. Grant was manic, pacing the room, drinking from the minibar, alternating between screaming at his lawyers on the phone and trying to charm Mallory into believing his lies. He told her it was a misunderstanding. He told her I was framing him. He told her they just needed to get to the Cayman Islands where he had friends who could fix this. But Mallory, for the first time in her life, was not listening to the melody of his voice. She was looking at the facts. While Grant was in the bathroom, shouting at a junior associate who was trying to quit, Mallory opened his briefcase. She had never looked in his briefcase before. She had always respected his privacy, which was just another word for her own willful ignorance. She found a second phone. It was a burner, a cheap prepaid model. She turned it on. There were messages, hundreds of them, but they were not from business partners. They were from a woman named Sophia. The messages were graphic. They were intimate. But what shattered Mallory was not the sex. It was the dates. Grant had been with Sophia on the night of Mallory's birthday. When he claimed he was stuck at the office, he had been with Sophia the weekend Mallory had a miscarriage, when he claimed he was at a conference, and then she found the receipts. There was a folder tucked into the lining of the bag. It contained travel documents, not for a cruise. There were flight confirmations for a one-way trip to Brazil. 2 tickets, one for Grant Holloway, one for Sophia Miller. The date of the flight was the day after the cruise was scheduled to return. Mallory sat on the floor of the cabin, the papers scattered around her like fallen leaves. She realized with a cold, devastating clarity that she was not his wife. She was not his partner. She was not even his victim. She was his cover story. He had married her because she looked the part. He had used her family to gain access to their social circle. He had used her father's credit to float his scams. And now that the house of cards was falling, he had planned to abandon her without a backward glance. She was a prop, a mannequin he had dressed up to make himself look trustworthy. The cruise ship turned around. The captain had received a notification from federal authorities. Grant was considered a flight risk. The return to the port was a funeral procession on water. I did not go to the dock. I did not want to see the spectacle. But Miles went. He stood in the back, observing, ensuring that the legal blockade we had built held firm. He told me about it later. When the ship docked, the gangway was lowered. My parents walked off first. They looked 10 years older than they had when they left. My mother was wearing large sunglasses, but they could not hide the puffiness of her face. My father walked with a stoop, his gaze fixed on the concrete, broken by the realization that he had handed his financial soul to a con artist. Then came Grant. He was walking fast, trying to look busy, trying to look important, but the men waiting at the bottom of the ramp did not care about his importance. 2 process servers stepped forward. Behind them stood 2 officers from the sheriff's department and an investigator from the attorney general's office. Miles said the exchange was brief. Grant Holloway. Yes, get out of my way. You are being served with a civil complaint for fraud, racketeering, and elder abuse. You are also being detained for questioning regarding the operations of Redfern Holdings. Grant tried to run. It was a pathetic, instinctive lunge to the side. But there was nowhere to go. The officers boxed him in. The handcuffs clicked. It was the end of the Golden Boy. Mallory walked off last. She was not wearing her hat. She was not wearing her sunglasses. She walked past her husband as he was being shoved into the back of a police cruiser. She did not look at him. She did not look at our parents. She got into a taxi alone and drove away. The next day, I drove to the nursing home where my mother had placed Evelyn for her own safety while they were gone. I had the court order in my purse. Miles had secured an emergency protective order preventing my parents or Grant from moving Evelyn or accessing her assets. I walked into her room. It was small and smelled of antiseptic, a sterile holding pen for a woman who had once run a household with an iron fist. Evelyn was sitting in her wheelchair by the window, looking out at the parking lot. Her black purse was on her lap, her hands resting on it. Guarding it even here, she heard my footsteps and turned. Her eyes were clear. There was no confusion today. I pulled a chair up next to her. I took her hand. It was frail, the skin like parchment paper, but her grip was still there. "It is done," I said. She looked at me. She did not ask for details. She did not ask about the money. She did not ask about the arrest. The cabin, she asked. Her voice was a rasp, dry as autumn leaves. "It is safe," I said. "I paid off the loan this morning. The title is clear. It is in the trust. Nobody can ever touch it again." She let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging as if she had been holding up the roof for years and could finally set it down. "And Grant," she asked, "he is in jail." I said, "He will not be coming back." Evelyn looked at me. A slow smile spread across her face. It was not a happy smile. It was a grim, satisfied expression. The look of a general who has watched the enemy army march into a trap. She let out a single, short laugh. It was a thin sound, sharp as a knife. "Good," she said. "Now we do it right." She squeezed my hand. "Take me home." "Kennedy," she said, "I am tired of this place. I promised. I am hiring a private care team. We are going to the cabin first, just you and me." I left her to pack her things. I walked out to my car, feeling the sun on my face. The air felt cleaner. The weight of 33 years of silence was gone. When I got home, there was an envelope in my mailbox. It had no stamp. It had been hand-delivered. The handwriting on the front was familiar. It was looping, decorative, the handwriting of a girl who had spent hours practicing her signature in notebooks. Kennedy. I opened it standing in the hallway of my apartment building. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. It was cream-colored linen paper, the kind my parents used to buy for her. I expected anger. I expected begging. I expected a request for a loan to hire a divorce lawyer. But there was no request. There was no defense. There were just 5 words, written in ink that looked like it had been smeared by a teardrop. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." I stared at the note. For years, I had resented Mallory. I had hated her for being the favorite, for being the beautiful one, for being the one who got the cruise while I got the scratch-off ticket. But as I looked at those words, I realized that she had been the victim all along. I had been neglected. Yes, I had been minimized. But I had been free. I had been forced to learn how to survive on my own. I had learned to read the fine print. Mallory had been fed a diet of praise and illusion until she was incapable of seeing the wolf sleeping in her own bed. She had been raised to be a prize, and she had been sold to the highest bidder, only to find out the bid was counterfeit. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. I walked into my apartment. The lottery ticket was gone from the fireproof box, safely in the vault at Miles's office. The money was just numbers on a screen now. But the real victory was not the $100 million. The real victory was that for the first time in the history of the Long family, the truth was the only thing left standing. The courtroom was quiet, smelling of floor wax and old wood, a stark contrast to the chaotic neon lights of the cruise ship where my family's illusions had finally died. This was the final hearing. There were no cameras, no paparazzi, just the hum of the air conditioning and the scratching of the court stenographer's machine. Miles Kitteridge stood at the podium. He did not raise his voice. He did not pace. He simply laid out the timeline of October 14th with the clinical precision of a coroner determining a cause of death. He projected the hospital admission logs onto the screen. He showed the timestamps of the sedative administration 2 milligrams of lorazepam at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Then, he overlaid the visitor log showing my father and Grant signing in at 2:45. Finally, he displayed the signature on the deed transfer document, timed at 3 o'clock. It was not a signature, it was a seismograph of exploitation. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked from the screen to my father. My father shrank into his suit, which suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for him. Grant was not there. Grant was currently being held without bail in the county detention center, facing federal wire fraud charges that were multiplying by the day. Miles concluded his presentation. He stated that the defense had offered no expert testimony to rebut the medical evidence because there was no rebuttal. A woman who cannot remember her own name cannot sell her house. The judge did not deliberate for long. She adjusted her glasses and looked at the defense table. She declared the transfer of the deed void ab initio, meaning it was invalid from the moment the pen touched the paper. She ordered the property returned immediately to the Evelyn Hartwell Trust. Then came the final blow, the one Miles had fought for. The judge added a permanent injunction. She ruled that neither my parents nor Grant Holloway could ever serve as trustees, guardians, or financial proxies for Evelyn Hartwell again. They were legally barred from touching a single cent of her assets. The gavel came down. It was a sharp, wooden sound. It sounded like a door locking. As the bailiff called the next case, we moved into the hallway. My mother was waiting there. She had not been inside the courtroom. She had been pacing the marble corridor, shredding a tissue in her hands. When she saw us, she lunged forward. She did not look at me. She looked at Miles, then back to my father, whose slumped shoulders told her everything she needed to know. She turned to me. Her face was a mask of desperation, the makeup settling into the deep lines of stress around her mouth. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, familiar. It was the grip of ownership. She said that we needed to talk. She said that the judge did not understand the full picture. She said that Grant had tricked them too. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I stepped back, creating a physical boundary between us. My mother's voice rose, echoing off the high ceilings. She played her final card, the one she had been keeping in reserve. She said that they raised me. She said they gave me life. She said that families help each other, and that this money, this $100 million, was a blessing that was meant to lift us all up. She said I could not just watch them drown in the debt Grant had left them with. People were watching, lawyers, clerks, other families. My mother counted on the public pressure to make me crumble. She counted on my fear of making a scene, but I was not afraid of scenes anymore. I looked at her, and I felt a profound sense of calm. I did not hate her. I just saw her clearly for the first time. She was a woman who had spent her life trading people like currency, and she was terrified because her wallet was finally empty. I spoke clearly, my voice steady enough for the onlookers to hear. I told her that she was right. She did raise me. She raised me to be self-sufficient. She raised me to be practical, and the most practical thing I could do was to ensure that the one person in this family who was truly vulnerable was protected. I told her that I would not be paying off their debts. I told her I would not be funding their lifestyle. I told her that the lottery ticket was a gift, and like she always taught me, it is rude to return a gift. I turned to Miles. I told him we were done here. We walked away. I did not look back. I heard her calling my name, but it sounded distant, like a radio playing in another room. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics, but they were the good kind, the kind of logistics that build things rather than destroy them. Grant's empire collapsed with breathtaking speed. It was not just the Long family he had swindled. As the investigation expanded, more victims surfaced: elderly neighbors, small business owners, friends from his golf club. He had been running a Ponzi scheme built on charm and shell companies. His assets were frozen. His cars were repossessed. The Golden Boy was facing 20 years in a federal prison, and his credibility had evaporated into thin air. I refused the Hollywood ending where I swoop in and save my parents from the consequences of their greed. They had co-signed the loans. They had ignored the red flags. They had to sell the big house. They had to downgrade to a 2-bedroom condo in a less fashionable zip code. They had to learn, at the age of 60, how to live within their means. It was a harsh lesson, but it was the only one that would stick. My focus was entirely on Evelyn. I moved her back into the lake house 3 weeks after the trial. I used a fraction of the winnings to renovate it properly. We installed ramps. We widened the doorways. We hired a team of 24-hour nurses who were kind and professional. On the day she moved back in, I wheeled her out onto the porch. The sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in the same purples and oranges I had photographed the day I declared war. Evelyn took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. She looked at the lake. She looked at me. She did not say thank you. She did not have to. She just reached into her bag, a new, soft tote bag, not the heavy black leather vault she used to guard, and pulled out a peppermint. She handed it to me. It was the best piece of candy I had ever tasted. Then there was Mallory. She filed for divorce the day Grant was indicted. She did not ask me for a lawyer. She used a public defender for the initial hearing and then found a legal aid clinic. She moved into a small apartment downtown and got a job as a receptionist at a dental office. We met for coffee 2 months later. It was awkward. We sat at a small metal table, nursing lattes, two sisters who were essentially strangers trying to learn each other's language. She looked different. She was wearing less makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked tired, but she looked real. She did not ask for money. She did not talk about the cruise. She looked at me and said she was sorry. She said she had been so busy looking at the reflection of herself that Grant created. She never looked at the man holding the mirror. I told her I accepted her apology. I told her that I loved her, but that trust was something that had to be rebuilt, brick by brick. I told her I would not bail her out, but I would buy her coffee. She smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but it was hers. It was not a performance. I did not keep the money idle. I did not buy a yacht. I did not buy an island. I created the Evelyn Hartwell Foundation. The mission was specific. We provided legal grants and financial support to women who were being financially abused by their families. We helped grandmothers whose children were trying to steal their homes. We helped wives whose husbands were hiding assets. We helped daughters who were being treated like furniture. We turned the pain into a shield. Every dollar that Grant had tried to steal was now being used to destroy men like him. The year turned. Seasons changed. The leaves on the trees around the lake turned gold, then brown, then fell. Thanksgiving arrived again. The table was smaller this year. It was set up on the enclosed porch of the cabin, overlooking the gray November water. There were no crystal glasses. There were no linen napkins embossed with gold. There were simple ceramic plates and a tablecloth I had bought at a local store. My parents were not there. They were having dinner at their condo, presumably complaining about the unfairness of the world. It was just me, Evelyn, and Mallory. Mallory had brought a green bean casserole. It was slightly burnt on the edges, and she was ridiculously proud of it. I had made the turkey. Evelyn was eating mashed potatoes with a gusto I had not seen in years. The room was warm. A fire was crackling in the stone hearth. The air smelled of sage and roasted meat. But there was no smell of pretense. There was no tension. There was no performance. I looked around the table. Mallory was laughing at something Evelyn had whispered. Evelyn was wiping gravy off her chin, unbothered by appearances. I looked down at my plate. Next to it, there was no lottery ticket. There was no cruise brochure. I thought about the Kennedy who had stood in the bathroom a year ago, scratching a piece of cardboard with a quarter, desperate for a way out. I thought about the fear. I thought about the anger. I took a sip of wine. It was a $20 bottle, and it tasted perfect. I realized then that the money was just a tool. It was a hammer I had used to break the lock. But the freedom, the ability to sit at this table, in this house, eating burnt casserole with my sister and my grandmother without needing anyone's permission to breathe, that was the prize. The jackpot wasn't the $100 million. The jackpot was never needing their approval again. I looked at Evelyn. She caught my eye. She raised her glass of apple cider. I raised mine. To the practical ones, I thought, we drank, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world. So please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel Helena Revenge Stories, liking the video, and hitting that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.